Best laid plans in a trash compactor. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor. Can't get herpes from a tractor. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor. In the way of what you're after. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nobody said stop.
Talk with you again.
All right. Well, hello, Adam Rowe.
Well, hello, Boris Galustan.
Galustion.
I tried. I thought I was going to be so smart.
I didn't realize Armenian name pronunciations would be so difficult for somebody born and raised in America speaking English all his life. But
Yeah, well, Galustion.
fail.
Fail. I was trying to seem so smart and witty, but I just failed.
Just think of Kevorkian
Yeah.
or Kardashian.
Yeah,
Same
yeah.
ending.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And that
Yeah.
signifies
Serge
Armenian?
Tarjekian, right?
And then UV makes it Russian?
OV. There's
yeah.
others that other variations on Russian names, and also other variations on.
So do a lot of Russian names end in V?
There might not be another variation on Armenian names.
Okay.
All right. So, who do we have with us today, Adam?
Well, today we have two of our good friends who, of course, appeared on previous episodes. We have our friend Conrad Borland.
Hey, how's it going?
And we have our friend and also business partner, David Grigolchik.
Howdy.
All right. Welcome, everybody. And we're very excited to explore this conversation. It's going to be a conversation about which I have very little personal knowledge, so I'm interested to see where this thing goes and if I'm even going to be able to contribute. But
Indeed. So, I'm in the same boat as Adam, but we have two history buffs with us today. And in fact, Conrad, you were a history teacher.
I was a high school history teacher. That's
interesting,
right.
interesting. Also, just for the record, your last name is not Borland, it is Boylan.
Correct, yes.
Correct. Okay.
Right.
And David, you just have an interest in history. You do have some, I don't know, did you study any of this stuff in college or anything like that?
A little bit, but it's always been a hobby of mine, just to accumulate knowledge about, mundane facts so I could be really good at Jeopardy.
Yeah, so I think Adam and I wanted you guys to kind of give us a few of your favorite generals and have a little bit of a discussion. I was thinking we'll go one at a time. And maybe start with David. He can suggest who his historical figure is. Then I'll have maybe Conrad assess it. And if Adam has any questions, we'll just see where the dialogue or the conversation goes from there.
And just a little housekeeping for the folks that are watching this. This is going to be a discussion about historical generals, military tactics, the great historical generals, and why we think they're great and what's so great about them.
Indeed. All right. So, David, you want to start us off?
Sure.
Who is your number one pick and why?
Well, I mean, I think the conversation requires a little bit of preface in that we should understand why generals that were really good and incredible at what they were doing and accomplishing. Because you have to understand, in a lot of history, there was no internet, there was no cell phones, there was no communication devices. And really, you're talking about the mass movement of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in unison. And being able to project your directives through a body of people to act in certain ways, to turn on the dime, to be able to accomplish things as if it's a cohesive organism is an amazing thing. And then keep in mind, if you zero in and you think about the individual soldier that's part of this mass of people who knows nothing about what's going on around them, knows nothing about the direction that they're in, dealing with issues of disease, malnourishment, heat, and being forced to march for miles and miles and days to arrive at the direction of one guy who's holding their life in their hands is incredible. To not even understand how you fit into this puzzle as an individual person. That's just the enormity of the mountains that these people moved.
Okay. So that's one thing. So the ability to, how would you say it in a few words? Is the ability to rally your troops, the ability to inspire loyalty, that kind of thing?
All of those things. To be able to...
And then to execute on top of that.
Yeah, to be able to execute, to be able to, to even get to the point of where you can actually have a tactic to discuss or to implement. Think about all of that you have to go through just to get there. And this is why so many generals they freeze. We call them incompetent or inconsistent. It's sort of like you watch sports, the NBA, the NFL, and you have these star players, and you're like, wow, that guy's a star player, but the other guy's a dud. He's not that good. But think about the other guy. He spent his whole life getting there as well. And he may be better than the average person. This guy's worked day and night, but he's still not able to perform like this guy. Mm-hmm. So the circumstances of these people being able to perform, I'm just trying to show how extraordinary these people were, as far as...
Okay. Are there some specific traits that you're going to be focusing on? So in other words, when you get into the people that you're actually going to be naming, do they have these qualities?
Well, let's segue to Alexander. How about that? That's
okay.
A good
well,
way
let me
to go.
Before we do that, just real quick.
Let's get a preliminary comment from Conrad.
That's very fair. I feel like the Venn diagram of like what we're going to say are these important traits are going to be really overlapping, and I would say definitely rallying your troops is definitely one.
That's perfect.
Right.
You're now speaking Adam's language.
Right. Rallying your troops is definitely one. Obviously, winning, having success. You could rally your troops and then lose and get killed, and we don't know who you are. Right. Winning is certainly that, and then the overall effectiveness, like what your role in history is. Right. I think those are kind of the criteria.
So as to the role in history, they're all generals, right? That's their role in history. What do you mean when you say that that's a criteria for how you would judge generals?
Well, just as we know, like if you ever took your favorite writer, they have their favorite writers who inspired them, right? Your favorite artists have their favorite artists. Generals are inspired by other generals, right? Like the one that he's going to say, we talked about this before the show, he's going to say Alexander the Great, which is going to top everybody's list, right? And
including yours?
Well, the reason I didn't choose him is because he already did. It's hard to argue against him.
Would Alexander have been the top of your list?
I'll tell you, everybody on my list studied Alexander the Great, right? Everybody on my list definitely looked at this guy, and they wanted to compare themselves to him, Julius Caesar especially. Mm-hmm. So,
Adam, anything you want to ask before we get started with David?
Anything I want to ask? I don't know. It's just interesting to me because my experience of military tactics, military understandings comes from the time that I spent as a soldier, and the generals were like in another universe from us. I mean, we were taught shoot, move, communicate. We were taught shoot, fight from the top of the hill. We were taught one shot, one kill, things like this. Mm-hmm. And we had no idea what the actual and it seemed like completely disorganized. It seemed random. It seemed like the generals or whoever the heck was giving the orders that got down to us had very little idea what they were doing, at least when I was in the Army.
So you didn't have confidence that they knew what they were doing?
No, I had none at all. In fact, my 2.5, almost 3 years in the Army led me to question how the United States ever won any wars ever, because it seemed like an absolute and total, cluster F.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess that one of the guys on my list is Napoleon, who's famous for saying, I'd rather follow a general that's lucky than one that's smart. So
interesting. All right. So David, give us all the reasons why Alexander the Great tops your list.
So by the way, to Adam's point, as far as the disorganization, if you imagine a pitched battle of 100,000, 200,000 people going at it, you may not know who your enemies are. It's a complete disorganized mass of people, body parts, everything, et cetera, et cetera. And so still, to be able to direct, and let's go to Alexander the Great and give an example of his greatest battle, which is defeating Darius III to secure the Persian Empire. He essentially had a force of about 40 or 50,000, and he was going up, conservative estimates, against a force of 120,000, maybe up to 250,000. The clash of probably that would be the biggest city in the ancient world. That would be a pretty sizable city now, clashing on a battlefield. And so the famous tactic, and this shows why Alexander was considered the great. He never lost a battle. Was that he basically decided that he was going to ride out as far right as he could, and within his force of cavalry, he massed light infantry. And so by him riding all the way out there, Darius is like, well, he's going to try and come around me. So why don't I take my force of cavalry, which is 3 times larger, and direct my subordinate to go and basically block that and come around him. And so basically encircle him. And so he took the bait, because what Alexander did with a force a third smaller is he then cut off and came inside and showed the light infantry. And the light infantry attacked Darius's cavalry, thereby pinning him to that location. But by all of the cavalry moving out, it opened up a channel where Alexander could come directly towards Darius. And so essentially he blitzkrieged, Darius's force with lightning fast cavalry straight towards Darius. And that spooked Darius, and he fled the field. And back in the day, you were fighting for your general. If he's fleeing the field, what the heck are you going to do?
Right. You want somebody with some balls.
Yeah.
Right. You want to fight for somebody that All right.
So here is, Alexander riding off that way. You don't see him. All of a sudden, in the next hour, he's like literally 100 yards from you, looking to kill you. And so this spooked Darius, and he fled. Wow. And then, of course, hundreds of thousands of people were massacred, or not hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of his own. He left his other parts of his army to pin them down as well. And so this is a reoccurring tactic that Alexander used in his battles, his successful battles, was to pin his enemy down, whether in the mud, whether, by a small force, by trickery, and expose themselves to being hit. And, one of the reoccurring themes that you'll hear Conrad use and myself is this concept of initiative. I think that concept is very important to success of a military. Initiative is to be able to take the action that the other side's not expecting, and then pound it home. Essentially, that's in layman terms. And so, Alexander took the initiative. One of his first battles, army double the size, blocked his way in Greece. He didn't wait or negotiate. In the middle of the night, he went around the mountain with his whole force and reappeared on the other side. In the middle of the night, without hesitation. So the guy was bold, didn't take any moment to make his decisions, and every decision he made was right. And so this is what gave him initiative.
And if Darius had called his bluff, had fortified his position, or just didn't flee, would he have thwarted Alexander's strategy?
I think by that point, when Alexander had already stricken at the heart and he was 100 yards away from Darius, Darius was not a warrior. He was an emperor. He was an administrator. And he'd already, lost 2 battles to Alexander before and had his army wiped out every single time and fled the field. So this was pretty much, Alexander's, way of calling him a coward to his soldiers. Like, we're going to wipe this guy.
Why didn't he have generals commanding his forces if he wasn't himself a fighter?
He did. Or Darius?
Yeah.
He did.
But you said the army broke and fled once Darius fled.
Because he's the heart of the army.
So there was no way for him
Well, keep in mind also the Persian army wasn't necessarily volunteers. There were slaves too.
So they were less motivated?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about initiative? So what is the distinction, or is there a distinction between initiative and just surprise?
You can obtain initiative by surprise, but you can also have surprise and you can still not get anywhere or go anywhere.
So what's the difference then?
I would say initiative is this intangible force where you've, basically, and we'll talk about Irvin Rommel, how he developed initiative, where you basically put your boxing foe on the back foot and they're wobbling. And so you pound it home because you realize that you have vulnerability. Through surprise, you can gain that, right? You can gain that by hitting them really hard where they don't expect it. You can gain that by ambush, which is sort of like surprise.
Right.
So you can do these things and you can put them on the back foot, and that's when you have an opponent that's vulnerable, and you can,
right, and that in turn solidifies your position with your men.
Yeah.
Right. You doing that and showing that initiative reassures the men. I mean, all of us played sports at some time before, right? You know that guy that's bigger, better, and smarter than you. You kind of like being on his team, right?
So the guy who's bigger and smarter than you, I think elephant and mice. If you find a weakness and you exploit it and you knock them off their feet or they get wobbly, you can defeat a bigger foe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like initiative is like decisiveness, and what
Correct.
I guess what Alex, because the
Right,
thing
that's
about
a big, decisiveness is a big for any general, any
right.
leader,
But the
right?
thing about decisiveness is, like, if you're making bad decisions, right, then decisiveness isn't particularly good.
Correct. It's
So
considered rash at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like the same thing as the difference.
Right, but
between
indecision is worse than wrong decision, right? You'd rather sit there with someone who has a plan versus someone who doesn't, right? Especially if there's
I don't know. Is that true? I mean, have there not been any leaders that have been particularly decisive and led their troops into disaster? I mean, I'm sure you guys can think of a handful of examples, right? At
I'm
least.
sure there's ones whose names we don't know because.
Well, I mean, there's the whole Japanese fleet. That was kind of rash.
Oh yeah, the Russians. Yeah, the Russians. Let's sail our entire fleet across the world, and when they're tired, hungry, and undersupplied, we'll let the Japanese just wipe them out. And then,
I mean, I would say the Japanese took the initiative at Pearl Harbor, and that was disastrous in the end.
That's true. And then, I mean, take initiative on my top general. I guess Julius Caesar was my number one. And I'm going to say, right, we all know crossing the Rubicon, right? We all know that phrase, right? Mm-hmm. We all know the exploits of Caesar in Gaul, going into Britannia, right? One of the things I mentioned earlier, Caesar's biggest hero, Alexander the Great. Yeah. The guy he studied, he said, hey, by 25, I want to do this because Alexander the Great had done this by 25. Caesar did not meet those achievements.
So Caesar, he was in Spain, interestingly, and he found an old statue of Alexander. And he was older than Alexander was at that age, and he broke down in tears. And he basically said that, I'm of this age, and look at everything that Alexander has accomplished. By my age, I've accomplished nothing.
Right. Think about that comparison. And then right there, quashing of rebellions.
So it's interesting that, I think most people, if you ask them, like, who are the greatest generals, even if they've never really read history, but Alexander and Caesar would come to mind, right? But it's interesting that Caesar is not one of yours. We haven't gotten to your second and third choice.
Well, I'm telling you, right. I'm sure a lot of ours, because it's tough.
So we can move on to stuff like, I just want to do one more thing. So another great major battle was when Alexander, one of his major last ones, when he invaded India and he fought against the king of Poros. And it was a crossing of the Hydaspes River. And it was an interesting battle for a number of reasons. But just to give you a comparison to Darius versus the king of Poros, the fight went on for the whole day, and the king of Poros was in the trenches with his soldiers, fighting off, and he was leading his men to the very last minute, like he was refusing to go down. And so Alexander basically called a halt to the fighting, and he said that I respect this guy, and I'm gonna, I want him to work with me, essentially. And so basically, he didn't do what he was doing with Darius, who fled the scene, displayed cowardice. Essentially, he learned to respect this guy because he was fighting with his troops, just like Alexander was.
And did he proceed to forge an alliance?
Yeah, this guy essentially became what do they call it? A vassal of Alexander.
He bent the knee.
He bent the knee, but they saw eye to eye with each other because Alexander had extreme.
But why would he bend the knee after fighting so?
I think there was a mutual respect, right. Because Alexander saw that this guy was not fleeing. He was going to go down with his men. He was fighting to the end. His son had died, and he was still going nonstop. This guy was not giving up. And so Alexander basically decided, and he could have slaughtered him. He decided to basically send one of his generals to, try to, settle with the guy, negotiate with the guy. And the guy refused Alexander like several times.
But that makes sense too, right?
He didn't want to surrender. He was going to fight to the death.
Wow. Right. Probably got more of Alexander's respect at that point too.
And Alexander just kept sending envoys.
Yeah. That just goes to show you how the character traits of Alexander were. It's just, I think a very kind of noble kind of guy.
Yeah.
So.
Now, he was also very vicious, right? Very cruel at times. Am I wrong about that? Could you guys speak to his cruelty?
The cruelest one will probably be his super loyal general, Parmenion, who had been at the battles, all of these battles. And he got word that his son was plotting to kill Alexander. Alexander got word. And he felt that if Parmenion knew, Parmenion would take action to defend his son, and he would come after Alexander. So he killed Parmenion as well.
Okay, so that was an example. I thought you said Parmenion was the cruel one.
No, his son is the one who conspired.
But
and
Alexander's cruelty is in that he was worried about betrayal and that.
Yeah, from Parmenion.
Right. So to segue into cruelty, and one of the things generals have to do. So there's a famous story. Caesar, my number one, he's gonna chop the hands off of all these men in Gaul right after he defeats after this big battle, all the remaining men get their hands chopped off.
Both hands?
Correct. They have to, go back. So if you were to ask Caesar, hey, were you cruel? Did you do that out of cruelty? He probably would say, no, I did that out of kindness. I want to send a message to everybody else. Don't mess with me, right? This is what happens. Think about what kind of message it would send the four of us if we knew the last guy that stood up to Caesar, that survived, got his hands chopped off. We might be rethinking, you know what? That doesn't sound good. So is it cruel to chop these men's hands off? Sure. But do I believe Caesar was some cruel maniac? No. Just like you have to imagine most of these generals, maniacal might be a word to describe them, but I would say there's got to be a method to their madness, right? There's no
It's reasonable.
right,
It's
exactly right. Caesar wasn't cutting their hands off just to cut their hands off. He had some greater purpose to it. So I think that's I guess that comes with the leadership category in general, right? Being able to
He could have easily just killed them, cut their heads off, and sent the heads back to the garrison to send his message, but he just cut their hands off.
yeah. Well, I mean, but it sends a message. It's
I mean,
and sending a message is another thing too that leaders do. So Caesar, the other big thing with him, always famous. He had like a scarlet cloak that he would wear in the battles. Everybody knew where he was. Everybody knew who he was, where he
how
was.
many men did he mutilate in this way?
I'm not
Is
sure.
there a figure?
I mean, there might be. I don't know what it
Well,
is.
I mean, that's, relatively minor to the fact that he killed hundreds of thousands of Gauls, women, children, men, wiped out whole cities and towns.
And how was that? Was that also to serve as a warning to the rest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So. But let's talk
Was
about
Alexander? Well, hold on. Yeah. Let's talk about both of them. Kind of, the interplay also between the two of them, since one clearly learned from the other. But the example you gave of Alexander killing his friend and loyal general because of a potential plot, that is the extent of Alexander's cruelty in your estimation?
His efficiency as a ruler. He did show mercy where people asked for mercy. If they didn't ask for it, he didn't give it. So I mean, we have a huge window of him waging battles and being highly successful. We have hardly any window to his administrative skills as a governor or as an emperor or any of that.
Do we think those things go hand in hand? I mean, we do see a lot of generals make good leaders, right?
But we
do
also see a lot of generals make
Economic,
terrible leaders.
I guess.
In fact, I mean, for every for every Eisenhower, you have a Ulysses S. Grant, right?
That's true, but I mean, Napoleon's number 2 on my list. I think he was effective not only as a general, but as a leader, as a ruler of a country, as someone spreading different ideas, right? There's certainly,
Let me get one question in on Alexander with reference to Machiavelli. So one of the famous Machiavellian dictums is that the prince, when he conquers a new land, if he wants to keep it, he should go rule from in the new land that he conquers. And I believe the example Machiavelli explores in that little argument is Alexander the Great, because he did rule from Persia when he conquered Persia.
Yeah, he set up shop in
and
Babylon.
he also did for a while in Egypt, I think.
Yeah,
too,
and
didn't he?
Alexander too.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is that correct? Does that have any relevance? Am I just rambling?
No, that's got to have something. I mean, that would mean something to me if I was the conquered person, right? if I was the conquered.
So Machiavelli wrote about city-states specifically, though, so it's a little bit different. You're right. I think he does use Alexander as an example,
right.
But he also gives many examples that are more contemporary to him, where they did not rule from the place that they took over and had a real hard time holding on.
And we can see that reflected in the world today, like when we tried to take over Iraq and Afghanistan.
Or just
I mean, innumerable examples are available.
Every empire that's ever been had to give up its holdings.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So that one other thing, before and you'll see this theme also, a commonality in all of these, is that the generals that tended to be on the front lines, like Caesar with his red cloak, Alexander in the vanguard of his cavalry, Hannibal, all of these guys, Napoleon, they were in there in the trenches with their soldiers. Caesar would walk instead of ride his horse with his soldiers. They would not ask them to do anything that they would not do themselves. Same with Alexander. Irvin Rommel ate the same food and slept in a sleeping bag.
So why did George Patton miss all that? Because he seemed to be fine, just directing things from behind.
Didn't he get in trouble for slapping somebody?
Yeah, he was a complete prick about it too.
The question is what and then this is why Patton maybe isn't in our top generals. I mean, at the end of the day, he doesn't register. Maybe he's just lucky at the fact that they have numerical superiority and technological superiority.
Okay. All right. So I think that covers a lot of Alexander, some Caesar. I guess, Adam, do you have any questions about Caesar?
Well, I mean, I just want to know, why did he do it? Why did he do it? It seems like he was powerful, successful, commanding all the legions in Spain and Gaul, and I guess at some point in Britain as well, I think. I mean, why would he do this? Why would he come back and take over Rome?
What, you mean when the triumvirate broke down?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the story, so give me the backstory or something.
Well, I guess, how long is this going to be? Because I know we have to. Rommel's going to be a good 20 minutes.
Well, just take your time.
No, I mean, no, we can roughly go. So if I'm remembering correctly, and David, you might need to help me. So there's So Caesar is going to be first consul, right? So Rome is going to be ruled by two consuls, right? So there's going to be two people that rule Rome and not one, right? It's going to have been that way for like hundreds.
That's the
hundreds
Republic.
of years.
That was the Republican
Right.
system. Two consuls.
So then he goes to Gaul when he's the consul, right? And then he forms a triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus. Right. So Crassus, he and Pompey, and they're going to rule together basically for 10 years. Right. So there's going to be more or less 10 years of them ruling together. And I believe Pompey is married to Caesar's daughter.
I think it's the other way around. I think Pompey married, or
Caesar married Pompey's daughter.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what it is. All right. And then I know that's going to fall apart when Crassus dies. And then there's going to be a power vacuum between him and Pompey. And then he's going to defeat Pompey and become first consul.
I think the die was cast because while Caesar was in Gaul performing what he was performing, and he was building this concept in Rome of I forget the word, where it's like, you know, you're earning your gravitas essentially, and you're
earning your citizenship. I think.
Yeah,
right?
you're earning. You know, you're earning through military, you know, conquest. You know, value for the society, and the Pompey's in Rome, controlling the Senate and the government basically outlaws Caesar and basically, you know, declares him an enemy of the state.
Right.
So they basically were going to strip Caesar of everything because he had gone beyond his mandate and done everything in Gaul. And so Caesar was basically, do I invade or do I get eaten by Pompey?
Right, which is why when he comes back, he gives the Vini Vidi Vici, right?
Yeah.
Right.
The I came, I saw, I conquered. He comes to Rome, right? And so then he appoints himself, first consul or sole consul or something.
So I think you were saying before that he was between a rock and a hard place.
Sure.
Yeah. So was that the answer you were?
Yeah, I just
You
wanted. I
anticipate-
just,
Well, I mean, I think from what I read about Caesar, he wanted glory his whole life, right? There's that story of him getting captured by the pirates, right? In the Caribbean, the pirates in the Mediterranean.
So what is meant by glory in this context? Why was glory such a driving force for Caesar? For
I think it was because glory was a driving force for Rome, right? And the more glory you could bring yourself and bring Rome, the more of a place in history you could solidify, right? Kind of like Alexander, right? There's a reason why his name reverberated around the empire, right? And now the word Caesar does, right? What is it in Russian? Tsar, Kaiser in German, right? His name became somebody's, right? Became the next, right? The somebody.
yeah, his name became synonymous with, you know, rulership.
Yeah.
With power.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, and David, do you have any comments about Conrad's selection of Caesar and how he compares to Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, I think Caesar's battles and the same traits that he had are very comparable to Alexander's traits, leading the troops.
Right,
you know,
the leading the
some
troops.
of these
is
battles were just like, you know, he basically he followed his enemy and trapped him into a siege, and then he built a castle around his siege so the relieving army couldn't relieve the entrapped army. And so to go through and, you know, build a castle around a besieged enemy that had 100,000 people in there. I mean, you know, some of these things were like insane. And when they were about to break through, Caesar decided to, you know, go on his horse, dismount, and lead the charge to fight off the people that were trying to break in, like without hesitation. So
Yeah, I think demonstrations really capture not just Caesar, but great generals, great leaders themselves. I mean, let's not forget Caesar's escapade when he crosses the Rhine. Right, when he crosses the Rhine, what does he do? He builds a bridge. He has his men build a bridge to cross over that bridge and into Germany. If the four of us were some Germanic tribe, we probably don't even know how to build a bridge.
Oh, and then he burns the bridge on the way back.
Right.
Just to show you I could do it.
Right.
and then,
Right. That's a message. That sends a message, like chopping off the hands. That's certainly right. If the four of us were Germanic tribal people who had no idea how to build a bridge, we'd be so scared. Right. You'd be so scared seeing this.
Or, you know, going back to Alexander, the island of Tyre, the city of Tyre, there's a half a mile of Mediterranean Sea. He says, no problem, I'm going to build a land bridge. And he instructs his army to build a bridge, literally, to besiege these people. And then he destroys them. So,
but he had these, why was he, okay. Was this technology not available? It wasn't ubiquitous at the time, so this was something that Rome had exclusively?
Oh, I mean, at the time, I mean, I don't know if the Chinese were able to do something like that, but yeah, it seems like only the Romans could in the Western world.
So how much of it was the availability of the technology rather than Caesar's own genius?
Well, I mean, you have the guy who made the aqueducts. You have, the genius in Sicily. The Romans acquired the knowledge of the Greeks, so that their architectural feats and all these things were not available to the Germanic tribes.
I mean, there's a part of the Iliad where the Greek forces, Agamemnon's men, build like a giant wall around the boats to protect the beachhead. I mean, I guess so. That's 1,000 years before Caesar, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, David.
Yeah.
So who is number 2?
I would say that the guy, each general has also their tactic. Like I mentioned that, Alexander had the pin your enemy in a place, a superior enemy, and then you basically take apart the other part of the enemy. So Hannibal's tactic, which was my second general, was ambush. And literally his ambushes were some of the most creative ambushes, and he was highly successful in defeating numerical foes repeatedly in Italy, including the Romans. Pitched battles. And one of the 2 ambushes that impressed me was he decided, instead of taking the easy road to meet his enemies, he was going to march them through the mountains a second time after the Alps, go through a swamp where they could all drown, where hundreds of them did drown, and then march them directly past their enemy, who was scared of him and that were basically in a fort. And so he just went past them like he was on the way to Rome. And so what is the enemy going to do? A numerically superior enemy is like, hey, wait a minute, where are these guys going? They're just going straight to Rome. We got to stop them. And so they leave the fort and they start following Hannibal. Of course, it's nighttime, and so they're walking. And so Hannibal walks around a lake, and he could go into the hill or to the mountain and conceal himself, but there will be tracks there. So he spends the whole night walking around the mountain with his troops to reveal no tracks, as if they had just continued forward and come through the mountain to be able to ambush them the next day. This is a 45,000 person army that he has,
with animals
in the dark, in the middle of the night, with animals, with pack animals, with servants, whatever else. He's able to reposition them in the middle of the night, in one night, to be ready to ambush off the top of a mountain. And of course, he annihilated everybody that was Roman when they came walking through the next day.
But I mean, you could see that tactic working once.
Oh no, it gets better. So Hannibal is a year later. He's in the Lower Peninsula. He went down there to try and recruit the Greek allies that were down in the Italian peninsula, who could be friendly, and they were friendly. They gave him troops, they gave him food, etc. And so the Romans assemble an even bigger army, and it culminates in the Battle of Cannae. And I think one of the common elements with these generals, including Caesar, Alexander the Great, is that at a certain point during these ancient times, once your army got beyond 50,000, it became really hard to control. So the Romans had a 100,000 person army, and they are trying to set up to go in and wage war with this guy. And it's in the middle of the summer, and the dust is picking up. So what he does is he deploys cavalry on the left and the right, which is common in the ancient times. And he puts his weak Gallic allies and everybody else in the center. And then he parks his best and most experienced troops on the sides, just vertical, like to the line. And then he directs his troops to go ahead and start marching towards the Romans. By doing so, and the Romans are too far away still, it picks up a cloud of dust. And the Romans don't see what's behind them, behind these troops that are coming. But the Romans know that they're numerically superior, and so they go full speed, and they send 70,000 men to go crush them. And they feel like they're winning. They're pushing back the Gallic enemy. It gets deeper and deeper. They feel like they're breaking through, and everything's going well. And they get deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's all covered in dust. They don't know, but the sides start to collapse in on them. And then the cavalry, which was very superior for Hannibal, defeated the Romans and came back and shut the lid. So he basically, in open environment, ambushed and slaughtered 50,000 Romans dead within a day.
So you used the dust storm?
The dust storm to essentially create, in an open environment, an ambush.
Camouflage.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine the size of these armies and everything to pull off that kind of thing in ancient times and slaughter 50,000 Romans in one day?
Can I imagine? I don't know. Can I?
Good one. Yeah, that's good.
Can I?
Rim shot.
All right, Conrad, care to respond?
Wow, that was impressive, David. That was nice. That was great storytelling. I really like that. No, obviously, yeah. Hannibal's at the gates, right? Isn't that what they told the Roman the children before they went to sleep? Right? Hannibal's at the gates to have them scared, right? Let them know. I mean, think about how 9/11 felt, right? New York feels impenetrable, right? Hannibal attacking the Romans themselves, right? In the home peninsula must have felt like that times 1,000, right? We talk about glory, we talk about ego, right? The Romans must have thought they were invincible. To see this guy on their peninsula, right? Like I said, it must have been like 9/11 times 1,000.
So the Romans essentially resorted after all these horrific losses to basically never to meet Hannibal in a pitched battle, and he would pull out his troops time and time again in front of their fort, basically sticking his tongue out. Come on, little bitches, essentially, and they were too scared of the guy, and so they basically decided that their strategy would be to deprive him of resources, like burn their villages, scorched earth, essentially, and not meet him in a pitched battle.
How did they finally defeat him?
So it happened not because of them. It happened because of the Carthaginian Senate. The rich aristocrats were worried that Hannibal would have too much gravitas, too much power, and he would come to rule over them. And so rather than sending reinforcements to Hannibal so he could finish the job and supplies and everything else, they cut it off.
Were the Carthaginians Semitic peoples or Hellenistic peoples?
They were Phoenicians, so
Phoenicians,
they were
okay.
closer to the Hellenic.
Yeah, Greeks.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, so it's interesting though. Like Caesar and Hannibal would have been, contemporary. Well, not contemporaries, but certainly their empires fought each other.
Yeah,
right?
all right.
So if we were to match up, is it possible to try to match up, Hannibal versus Caesar and just kind of
like a computer AI.
yeah, just like
matchup,
imagine what that combat would look like and who you guys think would prevail?
I guess it depends where it was, right? Where the
Well,
battle
let's
was.
say Hannibal just crossed the Alps, but instead of facing whoever he faced on the Roman side, here he is facing Caesar. If Caesar had just subdued Gaul, let's say, he's at the height of his power.
I mean, Caesar had his own tactics. He learned from both Hannibal and Alexander the Great, probably, and improved on those tactics. And by then, the Roman legions were also in a more advanced stage. So you had a professional army versus during the Hannibal times, these were just citizens that were drafted up.
Yeah, and it's that professionalism in the army that I think segues us to my number 2, Napoleon, right?
Yes.
Who really brought that professionalism to the army. I mean, just dividing into brigades, dividing into regiments, right?
So prior to Napoleon, they didn't have that?
Well, they did, but not like you think. They didn't have the autonomy that you would have thought. And then most of the times, too, they were led by a rich aristocrat as opposed to somebody that was battle-hardened and had the, should be leading, you could say. Someone that Napoleon could trust, that he knows that was kind of on the same wavelength as him, as opposed to, basically a rich aristocrat that got to raise his own army. So that's certainly, tactic changing. Obviously, supplying the troops. The way to supply the troops is a big change Napoleon brings, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly, that's monumental. I think the biggest proof with him,
to fail to supply the troops as Napoleon did.
Right, but that's only because he had the way of supplying them, right? That he could, right. But I think the big proof, I think, is in Napoleon's defeat. I think that's the biggest proof of, because we saw the Battle of Austerlitz, we all saw the Napoleon's movies, right?
Yeah, sure.
I think the biggest thing is how many countries it takes to defeat just this one man, right? Just this one general. I think that's enough evidence right there to suggest.
I mean, the movie kind of implies that the rain is what finally defeated Napoleon. The rain before the battle at Waterloo, right? I mean, can you comment on that?
I don't know. That's right. I'm sure that had an effect on it for sure.
I think that Napoleon, by the time he got to Waterloo, he had this retinue of generals that were like the top of the top. I forget what they called them. He gave them a special medal, a special status, and they were all really, really good. They were all dead by the time of Waterloo. So he essentially had an inferior army to when he had one previously. And I think Waterloo was after he was exiled, right?
Yes.
Waterloo is the last.
Right,
It
Waterloo's
was
when he
after
comes
the
back.
first exile.
Yeah.
Right.
There was a
Waterloo's when he
second
comes.
exile.
Right, when he comes
the story
back.
of that is that he marches out of Elba, and so the army that he assembles is clearly, ragtag.
It's like
volunteers.
farmers on
He's
his
just
way from
picking up
southern
people
France.
on his
Right.
way back to Paris.
Correct,
Is
yeah.
what I was taught.
Yeah,
in history
yeah,
class
that's how
in
I've heard it.
school.
But then he does get the regulars to join him as well once he
But
reaches Paris.
it's
so-
already been a shell. After Russia, they had lost so
well,
many.
and
so-
this would the fact that you list him as like one of the greatest generals, I have a little bit of a hard time with that, right?
Okay.
He's one of the ones I would say I'm a little bit more familiar with, primarily because of the movies, the recent Joaquin Phoenix movie, which was like
Fantastic.
fantastic.
Yeah,
I loved it.
But so it's real clear like where he succeeds early on, using artillery, using tactics that the other side didn't anticipate.
Well, or having the gravitas, like we said, the initiative, right? His
Absolutely.
initial victories.
And can I just say that initiative without luck is doesn't seem like it would work, right? Like
No,
you have to
certainly
have
luck,
God on your side, and
Well, I mean,
I'm using that term very.
But
generally.
time and time again, these guys like Alexander, they had a sixth kind of sense when they took the action that they took. It always worked every time.
So then, when Napoleon takes 600,000 of his countrymen, some of the best soldiers, some of the best generals, into Russia, relentlessly, gets them deep into the heart of the Russian winter where he can't get out. Strategic.
He actually
errors.
got to
yes.
Moscow. I think he's the only
Yeah,
foreign
he did.
general to get to Moscow in like 1500 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's enough to.
Well, I mean,
So
they burnt Moscow and all of his soldiers starved to death on the way
Yes,
back.
he
So
did.
it didn't work out well. But I'm just saying, no other general, including like Hitler,
Right,
ever
United
got
States
to
take
Moscow.
note. For the
So
United
was
States,
his
take note.
miscalculation simply that he didn't realize how committed Russians were to not give their land to a foreign
I
entity?
don't think he realized the fatalism of the Russian soul.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the Americans do.
So there's
they learned them good, did they not?
Boris.
Indeed, they did.
So there's something you hit upon, strategic error. So there's the overall strategic objective of why you're waging the war that you're waging. And then there's the tactical objective of every battle. And you can win every battle, but you can still lose the war. And so, Robert E. Lee, he won so many battles, but he never took D.C. and he never was able to win. So they failed in their strategic objective. And so I think you can say with Napoleon, major strategic blunder. His invasion of Russia, complete, he didn't grasp the enormity of the task, and I think he was overconfident about his own abilities.
Well, what about Tsar Alexander's performance in that? What do you have to say about that?
Well, he put this is my recollection. He had a general that came up with the scorched earth, tactic,
Yeah.
and that worked really well. I mean, it was able to deprive Napoleon of food for his troops, supplies.
Right.
It also deprived him of the glory. You think that showing up in Moscow with the city burnt with nothing there was, gloriful for his troops? That's completely
that's gotta
disheartening.
suck.
Yeah.
What about the idea of the of a defeat? Like so, I guess segueing into, I know your third one is Rommel, who I guess yesterday marks his defeat, right? Wasn't he in charge of trying to defend France? Wasn't that
He
his,
was the general in charge of German troops during the Normandy invasion,
Right,
according to Wikipedia that I read this morning.
So he failed yesterday, right? 80 years ago yesterday was his failure, right? But it's his
Yeah.
like birthday, right?
But
Isn't that
we,
what
we
happened?
don't remember him for that failure. I think we remember him for being the Desert Fox, his
Right.
nickname. And I think he showed up to Africa with a ragtag force of troops and performed way better than anyone anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told by Hitler to wait for more reinforcements and more tanks. And seizing the initiative right off the bat, he decided straight up, and the British didn't expect him to attack right away.
Yeah.
With his ragtag force, he was just like, I'm going to go straight at it. And so he had his own plane. He felt that he needed to observe everything firsthand to be able to tell people what to do. So he would fly his own plane over the battlefield.
Oh, wow, I didn't know
potentially
that.
getting shot.
Wow, that definitely.
That's
That's another common theme we're seeing in all these leaders having the balls to do it themselves, right?
Sure. Yeah, and so his soldiers would find them, at any moment they'd be like, "Oh, here's Erwin Rommel standing next to me, like watching out, at the British tanks coming at them." So yeah.
So my question is, what, as far as the North Africa campaign, what was the strategic objective of that?
The strategic objective long term was to seize Egypt and then essentially get to Mesopotamia, where you can seize the oil fields, because Iraq and Iran were friendly regimes.
Right, and because the only readily available source of oil to the Nazis was in Romania, and that was in jeopardy. In the second half of the war, it was in jeopardy and not producing enough. Sure. So did he? But he never got there, right?
Well, I think the problem became that halfway through the Africa campaign, Hitler decides to invade Russia and then diverts all the resources that are available for Operation Barbarossa, which another big strategic blunder there. But if he had gotten, I think that the where the Nazis failed in their strategic vision was that they decided to do that operation before they solidified the Mediterranean. And I think if they had solidified the Mediterranean Sea like the Romans did, you don't have to worry anymore of any piracy. You don't have to worry about any, seize the Suez Canal. Nobody can come up from the south anymore. You have a big Sahara Desert to protect you too. And so you're in a position where then you could do Operation Barbarossa, or then you could invade England or whatever. But their failure to secure the Mediterranean is the big strategic blunder, in my opinion.
Now, was that a call from the top, or was that Rommel's call?
No, it was Hitler's meddling, essentially. Hitler deprived Rommel of what he needed to finish the job, essentially.
Now, lay people tend to think of Hitler as also a strategic genius, right? In the way that he...
No. He had balls. He definitely had balls.
He had balls, and ultimately...
He was a very gifted politician, clearly.
Okay. But he's not viewed as a military strategic
taking
genius.
Alsace-Lorraine, right? Taking the... right. They had
that was Rommel, too, in France.
Okay.
He invaded France with, what's his name? Heinz Guderian, who invented the Blitzkrieg. So Rommel was a proponent of Guderian's school of thought. So Rommel, when he invades France, when they come through the Ardennes forest... he devises, because in the past the tanks would stop and they would shoot. He devises a tactic of where the tanks would drive and shoot at the same time. Just like the boxer, knocking somebody and making them wobble, the enemy didn't know what the heck was going on. You have these tanks driving at you full speed, firing right as they're driving into you. And this completely disheveled the French. So this is one of his tactical changes that he implemented. Then he implemented, when he got to Africa, he took the anti-aircraft guns and he decided that he was going to make them into straight cannons. And they could fire a lot longer, a greater distance than any British artillery. And thereby, the British could never hit the Nazi forces. He had double the range of any artillery piece because he decided to take the anti-aircraft guns and put them horizontal and fire them as artillery at the British.
So do you think if better reinforced, he definitely could have secured Africa?
Definitely, 100%.
100%.
Yeah. I think the guy, literally all of his moves were like Alexander, Caesar.
Now, if he had managed to secure Africa, do you think the Nazis might have won?
I think so, yeah. Because if they had secured the belt around the Mediterranean, they would have gotten the oil fields. Then it makes it to where they could easily focus all their energy on Russia. They could easily focus all their energy on Britain.
So,
so why didn't they do it? I mean, is it just a lack of patience on Hitler's part?
It was Hitler wanting, essentially, in his mind, the glory that's in his mind. You wanted to be the world's emperor.
But if he could have just secured the Mediterranean and delayed Barbarossa by 18 months or something, why would he do that?
He was actually advised to do Barbarossa earlier. By the time he pushed it back himself. By the time he was getting ready to do it, his generals already told him to hold off. So because by the time they launched it, I think it was at the end of June. The summer was halfway over, and so they were bound to get stuck in winter.
Right,
there was no way that they were going to reach.
If they had started earlier, then the whole Russia and everything would have been moved up earlier.
Didn't the Soviet Union also employ sort of scorched earth tactics as the Germans advanced?
They were completely caught off guard, and millions of them perished right off the bat. So no, not right away.
But they did eventually, right?
Yeah, eventually, yeah. But here's the problem that he had. He set out this line, I forget the name of it, to the Ural Mountains, that he wanted his troops to get there. And it was June 30th or June 20th that they launched their offensive. Right. Each tank, before refueling, you can actually calculate out how far each tank could go on a road, on a dirt road, because a lot of the roads became dirt roads. And you can do the math. You can estimate how much infantry could go. It would be impossible for them to reach that objective before the onset of winter.
Right.
Practically, it would be
impossible.
So
they knew it, but they had to...
No, they didn't know it. Hitler decided to just... because he wanted to do it, dictator Caesar. And so he basically, in the face of all of this information, probably known to the experienced generals, because there was others like Rommel, who probably thought this was a bad idea to launch it at this point.
So did Rommel? Do we have? Do we know that Rommel advised Hitler otherwise, or
Well,
no?
Rommel was Hitler's bodyguard for many years, and he specifically asked to be part of the French invasion. So he was with Hitler for many, many years, and Hitler probably trusted him.
So we're just assuming that he advised against it.
Rommel wasn't there. He was deployed to the Africa campaign. But you had Heinz Guderian that was there, and he advised Hitler that we needed to march on Moscow immediately and not stop to resupply, or not stop. So you know what happened?
Oh, he splits into three, right?
Yeah, so there was a north, center, and south. North got to Leningrad, okay. The center got to Moscow within like 10 miles. And then Hitler says, no, we got to stop. We got to make sure that the lines are very nice and perfect and clean. And we can't take Kiev. Apparently, we've been stalled near Kiev. You need to redirect your troops south so we can take Kiev. And so that's why Heinz Guderian got in a fight with Hitler, and he was removed.
Now, was Guderian, in your
Because-
estimation, a good general?
Yeah, because what does that do? It kills the initiative. You
Yeah.
got your foe.
Right, exactly.
I have
Yeah.
a question about Rommel. So, in my preparation for today's show, there seems to be at least some historians who feel that Rommel was tied up in the plot to kill Hitler.
Yeah.
Could you expound on that a little bit? What was his role? What happened with that?
So, I mean, there are multiple plots if you look back in the history books of people trying to kill Hitler. Some of them came very close. Like one of them, like I think the bunker got blown up in Lithuania.
Somebody put like a time bomb in a place
Yeah.
where
Was
there was
that
where he was
the
giving a
Tom
speech,
Cruise
and,
movie
and they
Valkyrie?
messed
Yeah.
up the timing
That
on the
was one
bomb.
of
It
them,
blew up
yes.
like an hour after he left.
Stauffenberg,
Yeah.
I guess. is
Right,
the-
yeah, that was his name. Yeah.
So, I mean, by 1944, a lot of these generals, they were loyal to their troops, like a good general's supposed to be. These are your brothers, essentially. And so Rommel, he ate the food. His troops slept in the desert. They had scurvy. They had all these problems, and Rommel was in there with the thick of it. So if you can imagine a guy like that and other generals that were like him, who were in the trenches with their troops, living in the cold, and here's a guy who's basically, treating them like meat, essentially. I think when it really came to a head, I think where people started having problems with Hitler was Stalingrad, where he allowed 300,000 Germans to perish. And he refused, or they asked permission to flee and retreat, and he refused to allow them that. So I think, I don't know personally, I don't think there's enough clear data to know whether or not Rommel was involved in the assassination attempts or the idea to remove Hitler.
Well, if you had to gamble,
this is on Wikipedia. I don't have no idea if it's true, but it's on Wikipedia because
Well,
I read it this morning. But it was that essentially Rommel had been implicated in the plot against Hitler, and Hitler had so much respect for Rommel in spite of that he gave him the choice of committing suicide and having his name honored by the German people, or being tried and
Right, 'cause that's what he
humiliated
does, right? He
and
takes
dishonored.
cyanide, right?
And they say that he took the cyanide pill.
Yeah, I do
well,
know
on top
that's
of that, he did it because he didn't want his son and wife to be also killed.
Well, yeah.
So-
But I mean, that just to me just says so much about like where this man's mind is at and what kind of man this is.
yeah, that's
Were you
true.
talking about Rommel?
Yeah.
Right.
He chose death and the
An
preservation, an honorable death to preserve the honor of his family over a dishonorable death, that would have.
No, I agree with you.
destroyed
That does say a lot about him, right? I mean, how many of us would do that?
I don't know that I would have had the
And
strength to
also
do
in,
it.
in
Yeah.
the face of the fact that I do think he wasn't actually involved in the plot. So you imagine that if he wasn't actually guilty and still to do that.
Yeah.
So
Well, let's not forget he was a filthy, disgusting Nazi.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have been too if you were living in Germany.
Gotta set the record.
I mean, all these people act like they wouldn't be Nazis if they were in Germany. I would say most of them would be. So.
I agree.
The vast majority of the people who hate Nazis in America in 2024 literally are Nazis. So.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot to,
Okay.
It takes a lot to stand up for what you believe in, which I think is.
They literally behave and hold and are in favor of political policies that are not distinguishable from Nazi policies.
Well, I guess that's a good segue into.
Example number one would be what happened during COVID. Go.
Yeah. Well, I think a good segue would speak of Nazis. We mentioned before, our audience might not understand the Nazi flag that was recently flown here in Jacksonville. But my third leader is Osceola, the Indian chief. So the reason I bring him up and mentioning the Palestinians, the Nazi flag, those of us who aren't from. I wasn't born in Florida. Got here as quickly as I could, though. But
Smart move.
yeah. So
Welcome and congratulations.
Right. So out of Tallahassee, we have the Seminoles, right? And their mascot is Osceola, right? And everywhere you go in Florida, there is something named after Osceola, just like everywhere you go in the U.S., there's something named after Lafayette or Washington or Lincoln. So everywhere you go in Florida, something's named after this guy Osceola. And there's good reason for it, right? This guy Osceola, I mean, this is a resistance movement. This is, so for those of us who don't know, so he's Creek Indian. He's half Creek, half white. So he's a Creek Indian. He's going to be, he becomes a leader of the Seminoles kind of by default. He's kind of captured when he's a teenager. All he's experiencing in his life is basically Andrew Jackson messing with his people. He kind of goes full on Creek, sheds his name. He's born Billy Powell is his name.
Something like that.
Right.
Very anglicized.
Right, exactly. Right. Like, seems like someone we would have gone to high school with, right? Mm. Seems like this guy, Billy Powell, and then all of a sudden he's a teenager and he goes by Osceola, which means it's some drink, I guess, so for those of us who don't know, the Seminoles weren't an actual tribe. They were mostly Creek Indians. They were other Indians. They were escaped slaves. They were kind of like a hodgepodge of everything that Osceola came to organize. And so he drank this sacred drink to become a man as a teenager in the tribe, and that's when he took the name Osceola. Mm. So he's gonna be, this is gonna be him as a teenager. It's gonna make us all feel old. This guy's gonna be dead by 34. All right, but before that, he is going to be truly a leader of his people. So we're talking, firstly, raids. If we were all settlers, they'd be called raids on the ranches. But as a Creek, he was probably seeing it as defending his peoples, right? And so more or less what happens is, short history, he gets chased down into Tampa, right? So it's out of Tampa that he's going to be launching a lot of his attacks. At one point, he gets malaria and is shot, still recovers, frees 700 of his men that are illegally captured. Eventually, he gets betrayed by a bunch of other Indian chiefs who were supposed to unite under him to defeat the white settlers. And then what happens is the final betrayal. One of the reasons I consider him a great leader is one of the themes of my three choices. So they were Napoleon, Caesar, and now Osceola, is what it takes to bring that man down. Right? With Napoleon, took all these countries to bring the man down. With Caesar, it took a major betrayal by some of his friends. With Osceola, that's what it took. So he's going to wave the white flag of peace. The Americans are going to go meet with them. They're going to give the signal, shoot all his men, take this guy prisoner, bring him up to South Carolina for trial, at which point he's going to die. But I mean, you can read you can read what the reporters in Philadelphia and Boston and New York were saying, let alone in London and Paris, what they were saying about the Americans. Right? Like, what you did to this man is horrific. Wow. Right? There's nothing, and he kept winning. He was winning every battle. It's because he didn't lose a battle, right? He's fighting from the swamps. He's doing all these things. His men truly believe in him. That's the reason. I mean, I hate to defend what the Americans did, but I kind of understand it. Hey, we're not going to beat this guy fair and square, right? And then, of course, what happens after we kill him? His men get disheartened, right? Because that's what it says about a great leader, a great general, right? Like if any of the other guys we talked about had gotten killed in battlefield, right? In the middle of the battlefield.
Would you say he's very comparable to the guy from Braveheart?
Yeah, right? That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
There's a story on Osceola's wiki page about a treaty that the sort of vicar of Indian peoples that was appointed by the United States, who was half Indian, was trying to force the Seminoles and the Creek and the various other tribes to sign this big treaty.
Right, that's right.
And then apparently, like, Osceola didn't want to do it. He was ordered to do it, and then the vicar basically flexed his power and said, "You have to do it." And Osceola took this knife out supposedly and just stabbed it right in the treaty paper after they signed it. Could you comment on that? And is that correct? Is that real?
I don't know. No, I've heard that same story. I guess if anything, it attributes to his legend or to the fact that history tends to favor the guy the David versus the Goliath, right? History tends to favor the guy. And I mean, if we're reading the story, righteousness is on his side, right? That treaty, how fair do we think that was to him, right? There's no way the four of us could sit here knowing what we know about history and think, man, this guy was dumb not to sign that treaty, right?
So I'm a lifelong fanatic, which I will shorten to fan, of the Florida State Seminole football program, whose mascot, of course, is Osceola.
Yeah.
And Osceola always appears in Florida State lore riding on an Andalusian horse called Renegade. Is Renegade real? Is that just made up?
No, I don't know. Now I have to look into that. That's an interesting question to ask. It's certainly, I guess guess one of the things with Osceola, right, there's a reason everything is named after him in this state, right? There's a reason he becomes the mascot, right? And in many ways, it is like the most American thing you can do, right? We all like to stand up to that. The history books are filled with Robin Hoods. They're filled with, hey, this guy, he fought to the very end. And from all accounts, Wikipedia, whatnot, it's not like, from everything I've read, this man wanted this super glory. He wanted these things. Apparently, it really was over the way he felt his people were treated. Mm-hmm. It truly was one of those, hey, my people have been here for, kind of sounds familiar in the Middle East, right? The old, my people have been here for a long, long time. Who are you to come here and tell me I can't live here anymore?
And where the hell are we supposed to go?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Where are we supposed to go? Thousands of miles away, you say, to some place we've never been.
So, growing up in the Soviet Union, the name of a Native American hero that I was familiar with from like my earliest age was Osceola.
Was it really?
Osceola Vosh Seminoles.
That's funny. Yeah,
the chief of the Seminoles.
I hadn't heard of him until I came. I was always a big Tecumseh fan, and then I moved to Florida and found out about Osceola. That's funny.
So, could you speak to two things? Okay, so the first thing is you talked a little bit about his motives. About you mentioned generally how he won many victories before he was betrayed and killed. But what about his tactics? Did he? Was there anything about his tactics that stood out that make him a particularly good general in your?
Well, I guess it's a lot of raid and ambush, like we've been talking about, and a lot of it too is the fact that he was seen with the men, that it was very, very known who he was. He was followed, right? It's one of those things like people saw him shot and continued on, right? So it certainly is. There is.
Would you describe his tactics as guerrilla warfare?
Correct. Yeah, I definitely would. It's definitely right. That's what you're doing when you're fighting from the swamps, and you're basically told, all that good farming land, that's
slow
not
bleed,
yours.
Death by 1,000 paper cuts, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. But and then I could say, if I was to rate his weakness, I guess his weakness was the fact that he was probably half white and kind of thought white people were going to respect him and thought the white flag
he thought
meant
the white
something.
people would keep their word when they,
exactly.
when they sign treaties and not just bring him in to sign a treaty and then just take him to kill him in Tampa. Yes.
Right. So
he was naive.
What about his cruelty? Was he cruel? Or were there instances where
from the accounts I hear of, I don't think so. That's not to say, I'm sure, I don't know, I've never seen these footage of the raids, if in the heart of the moment, he did something. I don't know, but from a lot of things that I've read, no, that doesn't seem to be the case. There was no cruelty. There was no, as much as you would think he would be anti-white, there was no, it wasn't like a major, it was more of a political thing, right?
Was there a gigantic technological difference between Osceola's forces and his enemy's forces at the point when Osceola was fighting in the early 19th century?
I don't know. What I think.
The history of the European conflict and conquest of the Americas and the American natives, right, is a history where an army with massively advanced technology attacks an army with comparably ancient technology. Right. Had that balance had it balanced back to center by the time of Osceola, or were the Indians still vastly disadvantaged from a technological angle?
To add to that, do we know if the Spanish at all? Because I think Florida was a Spanish colony today. Osceola at all?
When Osceola's a teenager, they're going to be a Spanish colony. Right, and then it's going to be 1819 when Spain becomes part of Florida, or Florida becomes, part of the United States. Right, they're gonna. The Spanish are barely here. Right, that's why the Seminoles are here. That's why the Creeks and these runaway slaves come to Florida, because the Spanish are barely policing it. But what happens is, as soon as it becomes in American control, they're right on it. You got to imagine during the War of 1812, right? These armies are all down in the south. They're all down like that in the greater northern Gulf of Mexico area. They're quashing Indian raids, I'm sure, right? They're definitely doing these things. They come down to Florida. They're taking all the best farmland, right? As soon as this becomes American, you better believe we took all the best farmland, right?
But by the time of Osceola, though, Osceola's forces had access to essentially the same level of technological
I would imagine
as his opponents.
I wonder how hard. I wonder how useful horses are in swamps, right? I wonder that sometimes, I could see horses definitely on the plains or in other areas, but in swamps, I feel
in
like
the Panhandle area where Tallahassee's located. I think that would be a little bit.
And of course, they would have obviously had rifles and gunpowder by then, obviously.
Right, true. But the Americans have the numerical superior numbers. I guess the biggest thing Osceola has going for him is the size of the fight in the dog.
But that's right. Technology.
The tactic of surprise, I guess. To
right.
Try and gain some initiative, I guess.
All right. So David, did you know anything about Osceola?
No.
Okay.
Learned some new
So
things.
do you have anything to say?
No, I mean,
Okay. Could we do this to kind of wind this down? So I think we went through about 6 different historical figures, 3 from you, 3 from David. If we could kind of boil down their essence to the intangible, like these intangible characteristics that each of them possessed, who would you say out of the 6 is the greatest? So not with reference to.
Well, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, can we first, maybe figure out what probably all 6 of them had in common?
Sure.
Right.
That's a good idea.
I think the first one we could agree. If I can get some more. I think the first one we could agree is charisma. Right. I couldn't imagine any of these guys were. Thank you. Any of these guys were boring men. Right. I couldn't imagine you talked to any of these people and you were like, I don't want to fight for this guy. Right. I imagine all of them have to have some sense of you know what I mean? They probably impassioned in some way,
so
right?
David used initiative or decisiveness as a characteristic, and you're saying charisma.
I would imagine, right? They'd have to have something.
I would say, yeah, all of them would have to have charisma. They would have to have the ability to be leaders amongst their men. They would also have to have some level of empathy towards their own people.
Right, I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
I think
So when Napoleon did what he did, he didn't seem to have empathy for the 600,000 Frenchmen he was dooming, and there were many, many opportunities for him to turn back.
No, but in the beginning, I mean, sometimes you're caught in the heat of things, but in the beginning, I think it stemmed from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was a soldier. He was in there with his troops. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that he was. That's who he was, and that's why when he marched from Elba, the troops joined him along the way. His old veterans.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I mean, if the 4 of us were in France and we heard he came back, I bet you we would have followed him.
Yeah.
Right.
So I have a question. All right, so let's talk about a modern general and let's analyze them in terms of these older generals that we've been talking about. So let's talk about Pegrosian.
Okay.
How does Pegrosian compare to these 6 generals that we've discussed? I mean, it seems like he has some of their characteristics. He's known for being a man that fought with his troops, that led from the front and not the back. That's what we're told, anyway. What do you guys think about him? Does he compare in any way to any of these guys?
Prigozhin was a
Pegrosian.
frontline kind of guy?
No,
That's what they said on the news, man.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that was not my take of him. I mean, my take of him was that he was doing lots and lots of podcasts from his bunker. So, and I didn't see many, frontline engagements. But I think most of his stuff was propaganda pieces where he would show up in the front lines.
CNN, Fox News, NBC all say that he was a guy that fought with his troops.
By the way,
front.
he died
For whatever that means.
Or was that propaganda to make you like him more? Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't CBS, NBC, and CNN want me to like Pegrosian?
Because of the fact that he launched a coup, and maybe that was.
Well, I mean,
Is he dead?
Yeah,
Is Prigozhin
his
dead?
plane was blown up.
supposedly dead.
Right, yeah, that's what they say.
He's allegedly dead.
Because weren't there some photos of him
Epstein is
alive?
also dead. Yeah, supposedly.
I think that the problem that you have with people in this day and age with modern technology, we talked about drones before we started, missiles, hypersonic missiles, jets and airplanes. I think the role of the general that we've referenced has been diminished. I wouldn't say it's completely been diminished, because I still think you see an effect of one general in particular in this Ukrainian war that is very obvious, and that's the bald-headed guy that got removed, Sokolov, however you say his name, General Armageddon. He is the one that set up the defensive lines across the south of Ukraine that basically nullified any counteroffensive. And so his moves to start, building those defenses before any inkling of any counteroffensive was going to come, basically allowed Russia to nullify that completely and basically regain the initiative at this point.
How does Norman Schwarzkopf compare to these ancient generals?
Norman Schwarzkopf.
He was the supreme commander of the troops during the first Desert War, Desert Storm.
Yeah, so much so that I don't know.
Desert Storm. Yeah.
So Desert Storm, that was the American Blitzkrieg.
The first Desert Storm,
where they didn't kill Saddam Hussein.
We swept in and ran him out of Kuwait, but let him go back to Baghdad.
Well, can I let me ask you guys a philosophical question about these generals that we're talking about? So, I mean, I think we can all agree that there is something in the human spirit, something in the human condition. I mean, we see it in Joan of Arc. We see it in what is it from Terminator? John Connor. We see the idea of like, if only this righteous general would step up. I mean, it's one of the reasons I like Osceola is because there's defeated Indian people. Then if only this one guy would step up, we could all follow him, right? Let me ask you guys this: if the Palestinians had that, do you think that would change the situation there now? If they had some figurehead, right? Because like I was talking about, we talked about Alexander the Great, known by his men. Caesar, known by his men with his scarlet thing.
They had Arafat for a lot of years.
That's a good idea. What? And then they messed up the PLO. They kind of brought in the...
Actually, to think of a modern general that had probably the same gravitas and the capabilities and the connection with the troops, the closest one I can think of in modern times is Colin Powell.
Agreed. Yeah, that's a good point. He's definitely had like a...
So where would that have come across? Which campaigns has Colin Powell commanded that would have been
the first Desert Storm, at least?
The Desert Storm. But I mean, just his whole, he himself, he inspired loyalty in his troops.
Right.
He carried himself like, somebody with gravitas. He had success. He also came from all the way down as a lowly troop all the way to the top.
Right. His credentials gave the weapons of mass destruction meaning.
He was a self-made man without a doubt.
And
he is a self-made. He's alive, right?
Yeah.
He died.
passed
Didn't
away.
he just died recently?
Colin Powell was dead?
Like
Yeah,
a couple years ago, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I know he...
I didn't know he was dead either, man.
And then somebody told me an interesting story. He decided to stop on the side of the road in D.C. like a couple of years before his death, and he helped somebody change a tire.
Are you serious?
So,
Just an awesome
Yeah,
person.
so you're just a nice guy like that.
I wrote an essay on his like biography or whatever, like a book report in like the 7th grade. So I've been a fan of Colin Powell, and then of course the whole Iraq thing happened, and when we had time to
his
reflect,
credibility,
it just destroyed him. But Adam said that I guess you have a recollection of where he was really, really pissed for the way he felt that he was set up with the whole thing.
Well, they clearly set him up. First of all, Colin Powell was an outlier in the Bush administration. He had they decided pretty early that he was going to be a problem, and he was isolated. And then, of course, they wanted to invade Iraq, and they needed somebody to go make the final speech at the UN, because back then we actually cared about the UN and actually doing our wars legally. That was before we had completely rejected international law utterly, as we have now. But they sent him to make this speech about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and he knew it was bullshit. And there's literally tapes that came out at one point of him with his people the night before the speech, screaming at them that this is bullshit. But he was a good soldier. And he felt that it was his duty to obey the president. He went to the UN, and he completely disgraced himself. He lied his ass off. Yeah. He knew he was lying his ass off. He deceived the world, which created a foundation for the United States to, of course, invade Iraq and destroy Iraq and murder God knows how many millions of Iraqis and whatnot. And it disgraced him. And he left the Republican Party. He absolutely, it destroyed him. It destroyed his career. He could have been president.
I would have voted for him.
I would have voted for him. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, they basically put him out there because, I mean, literally, he was probably one of the few that wasn't a neocon. If you look at some of these
They put him out there
people-
because of his credibility. Because
his
he had
credibility.
overwhelming credibility, unlike any of the other members of the Bush administration at the time.
Can you imagine if they send out Paul Wolfowitz?
Or Cheney.
Or Dick Cheney?
Look at this vial of anthrax!
That's true. Yeah, they saw him. They saw.
Remember
him.
he pulled the anthrax out of his pocket in the UN?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, that's anthrax?
Right.
Like, you could just open it up and we're all dead? Like, what is that? Okay, anyway.
All right.
Look at this anthrax right here!
So, Conrad, do you have any honorable mentions of any other generals that you want to remark on that you considered?
I mean, I know I haven't considered. There's a few honorable mentions that come to mind, but no, I guess.
Anyone?
How about just one American general? Because we've done, all these generals are non-Americans.
Stonewall Jackson.
Stonewall Jackson. Why?
I like Andrew Jackson.
Same thing. Surprise, ambush, valor.
But what about Robert E. Lee? I think he's the greatest American general.
It could be.
I think Robert E. Lee, he was a great defensive general. And I think he inspired loyalty in his troops. But I think once Stonewall Jackson went down, it became obvious that the reason for his success was...
Well, didn't Stonewall Jackson have massively greater resources and massively greater men and massively greater troop strength?
He served under Robert E. Lee. That was his lieutenant general. That was the guy who was under Robert E. Lee.
Wait. Stonewall Jackson fought for the Union, right?
No.
No.
Am I confused?
No,
Okay,
Stonewall
never
Jackson's
mind.
he's on Stone Mountain, right?
Okay.
He's like carved in
So
Stone Mountain.
Stonewall Jackson was his underling, and right before they did the Battle of Gettysburg, he goes down at the Battle of Chancellorsville, and that's when everything changed. I think he was the guy that took the offense, and with limited resources, inspired. The reason why he got his name Stonewall is
because he stood there.
He stood there in the face of, I think, the Second Battle of Bull Run, and basically he was dependable, and major bravery. So the guy literally also probably never lost a battle.
Why is it that even like people who aren't historical buffs like me, right? We know these names: Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
We know all these Southern generals. I can't think of a single Northern,
Ulysses S. Grant,
except for him, right?
Sherman.
Because he became president.
Well, Sherman.
Comes to Sherman.
Okay.
Everybody knows Sherman burnt down
Yeah,
Atlanta.
you're right.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else? Who else though?
Well, I don't know if you know
There was
George Meade, the guy.
Right.
who-
Then there was Hooker.
Yeah, there was
General
Hooker.
But you guys would both say, all three of you would probably say that Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee are heads above these four, right?
Well, yeah, the Confederates had a way better general pool. That's the one major advantage that they had over
Right.
the
Plus, they
Union.
had people believing in their generals and believing in the cause.
Yeah.
The Union had overwhelming advantage in resources and men, I believe,
Yeah.
and in industrial capability as,
So
as well.
how did that happen that all the great generals were in the South?
Well, remember the military academy was in Virginia.
Right. VMI and the Citadel was in South Carolina.
Virginia, that was in the South, and Virginia was the capital. The capital of Virginia, Richmond, was the capital of the Confederacy, I believe.
Oh yeah, for a bit.
So,
yeah.
so you,
Was
you,
it?
you have to
Yeah, until it was
understand
taken-
that
until it was taken,
the
yeah.
traditional military, like from the Mexican War and stuff, was it was still a cavalry type of thing, and riding horses was more of a common art thing that came probably from England in the South, and so you had a lot of natural inclination to be a soldier in an impoverished South, especially if you didn't have a slavery estate. So
What you didn't have was factories
Yeah. Right.
and finance
and railroads.
and money.
And railroads.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, let me just say my honorable mention would be Andrew Jackson, just because of the defense of New Orleans, right? We know, right? He comes down to New Orleans, right? He frees the prisoners. He gets pirates. He gets women, hookers, you name it. We're all defending the city, right? He comes there and he's telling everyone, we're all defending the city. I mean, it is kind of a crazy story, right? Frees the prisoners, gets the pirates, gets the whores, gets everybody you think is new in New Orleans, all defending it, right? They're all defending it. So, I mean, there is
Then later in the political arena, he went to war against the old version of the Fed. And
right, yeah. There's got to be something said about that. He
Central
also
Bank.
he also didn't back down, right? He had like a bullet lodged in him,
Now,
right? He was known
obviously,
to have like
today-
He also won 3 duels, right?
right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, he had a bullet
Duels,
lodged,
man.
right?
Like literally 10 paces and a shot. He
Right.
won 3.
And let's not forget the reason there's no Indians in
We have
Florida.
not had a man like that in charge of this country in many, many years.
Man, Alexander Hamilton could have learned a thing or two.
Right.
So hold on, I have another honorable mention since we did Caesar. How about Pompey?
Okay, yeah, we might as well, yeah.
Because I think he came this close to actually defeating Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus.
yeah.
So Pompey was quite brilliant himself as a general.
so-
right, this triumvirate was
he
the first
tried.
triumvirate.
So
was
he
no
tried a
joke.
move that was called the hammer blow tactic, which was also, I think, invented by Alexander, but Caesar actually used it. You pin your opponent down and you swing around from behind and you hit him like a hammer. And so he came close, but Caesar countered it. And you know how he countered it? He had left a hidden fourth line in the back. So as Pompey comes around to hammer blow, no hammer blow for Pompey.
So Pompey also burnt the Second Temple, right? 70 BC or 70 AD? Wasn't Pompey?
that's Titus, Emperor Titus, however you
It
pronounce
wasn't Pompey?
Yeah, no.
Okay, so Andrew Jackson, obviously as president, was known for his cruelty. Right? We
Right.
talked about the Trail of Tears. Was he also quite cruel when he was just a
Called
general?
the Indian Removal Act, but yeah, you could rename it as the Trail of Tears, sure.
I'm not the one renaming it.
Did he have to do that?
What?
I do think
That's
the name
my
applies.
biggest question is, did he have to do it?
Well-
That's what I always wonder about. Because it's not like you can live side by side. The Indians that were moved were considered one of the most peaceful and nicest group of Indians, right? That's my understanding.
Well, you could say that,
the
or
Cherokees were like very advanced.
right. But I mean, if I was Andrew Jackson, I'd probably be saying, "You're being naive, David. These people hate us." Right?
Well, I mean,
We've come and conquered their
here's the
land.
question. Why was Britain able to take over India without removing the Indians, but we weren't able to take over America without removing our Indians?
Well, I mean, did Britain really secure all of India all that time?
They didn't have full control.
Right, I was
Yeah,
about to say,
and
India's a
also
billion
some-
people.
Yeah, and Britain lost control of India.
After like 180 years or something.
Well, and they were never. It wasn't like a situation. I don't know. It
What's
wasn't
this?
like a situation where like Brits were en masse settling in India, was it?
Yes, it was. And in fact, the King of England, I think even, or at least up until like 1950 or whenever they separated, was literally the Maharaja of India.
Oh, wow.
They
Literally.
had famous people from England that were born there too. I think like some of the prime ministers. You know.
Sort of like the Pete
I
Norris
think the
and
current prime
Algiers,
minister
I
is
guess,
Indian,
from
right?
France.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about like Caucasian.
Yeah, didn't George
you know.
Orwell like spend time in India when he was a kid, right?
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah. So, but as far as Andrew Jackson, was he cruel as a general, to your knowledge?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't very nice to the Indians he captured.
Okay, fair enough.
Let me ask one last thing, just when it comes to generals and everything. I could be wrong. If so, edit this part out. But
That there will be no editing.
the Houthis we were talking about earlier before the program started, they're like, that's a guy, right? There was like a general or something named Houthi, right? Wasn't he like a person that they named
Are you
themselves
thinking
after?
about the Rwandans, the Houthis, and the Tutsis?
No. The Houthis in Yemen are named after a person.
The Hutsis, I believe.
No, yeah, those are the Tutsis and the
And it was the Tutsis and the Hutus.
right, the Houthis. And the Tutsis. Right. But no, I believe, and I said we could edit this out, but I'm pretty sure the Houthis are named after a guy named Houthi, right? I think he was like their leader that got killed like 20 years ago, and that they've been in charge of Yemen ever since. And the only reason I bring that up is, again, the idea that, you know, people want a leader. People want a leader they can follow, right?
I would expound on that, but I've been told that this is not a naval show. This is an army show. So we're going to have a show about the admirals.
Okay, all right. So a TBC then. All right.
All right, very good. All right, let me go ahead. I want to start with David and kind of go around, and I'd like some last words from each of you, and then Adam's going to get sign us off with his prediction. So, David, any last thoughts and summation?
No, for me, it's always an incredible thing to conceive and think of, these people that were essentially able to, like tentacles, control tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and all the way to World War II, millions of people. Like Operation Barbarossa was like 2 million Germans or 3 million Germans, and to act in unison and to get that message down to the lowly soldier who thinks everything's a disorganized chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, that's just an amazing, a human feat. It's I don't think enough credit is given to it. It's not something that people fully appreciate.
Okay, fair enough.
To continue what David's saying, I would say, I think one of the most powerful forces in the world amongst humans that can't be quantified is inspiration. Right, I would say, inspiration is definitely a power. None of us would deny that, it definitely exists, right? You see someone gets inspired by something. How do you really define that, right? That's somebody acting of their own volition based on somebody else's actions of their own volition. And I would say that one of the hallmarks of a great leader, certainly a great general, is inspiring that, right? Because if you're that lowly guy who thinks things are disorganized, you're not doing things for someone who's uninspiring, right? You're not going to do this for somebody who you yourself don't believe in. I think everybody we saw on this list, if any of us ever met, we'd be super impressed by.
Yeah, for sure.
In 3 years of a little less than 3 years of being a member of the United States Army, I saw a general one time, and it was a 1-star general, and I saw him for about 3.5 minutes. So I had no idea who the generals were. I didn't care who the generals were.
Yeah,
I mean, what I cared about was the sergeant that was over me that was going to kick me in the balls.
So
So I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
if you had more interactions with the general, do you feel like you would have been more championed for a cause, been more easily sent to battle?
I mean, I don't know because it never happened. I mean, maybe,
Yeah.
sure. I mean,
So supposedly some of these generals, like Caesar, actually knew the individual people, like where they came from, their family.
Right. Yeah,
They say that about Nimitz too. I mean, he's not a general; he was an admiral. But they say that Nimitz had an amazing ability to connect even down with the lowest, the E1s and the E2s.
Yeah, same with Alexander. Like he would comment, hey, how's your dad doing and stuff like this. To when they were lining up for battle, like he would have these conversations with his troops. Like, hey, I remember you were at the battle with me 5 years ago.
My grandfather fought in the Battle of Midway, and he was in the briefing with Admiral Nimitz.
Oh, wow.
Right before the battle was going to start, and he said that Nimitz had almost photographic memory for names that he would remember. He'd be like, "Hey, pal, how you doing? How's your wife?" Like he would remember these nobodies. I mean, these are grunts. You know, these are 17-year-old kids that are about to go fight, and he could remember their names. He knew who their parents were. He was like blown away by it.
Do you think that that's like a manipulation, like a tactic, like a la Machiavelli, or do you think it comes from like a genuine love and respect for?
I think with Nimitz it was a tactic. There's rumors that he had people who were basically in his ear telling him who these people's names were so he could make this connection. But the fact that he found it important enough to do that and to set that up, I think still speaks volumes about Nimitz. Okay.
Agree. Yeah, just the fact that he cared enough to even do that.
Yeah.
Right. Versus not even.
I think that whether it's genuine or not, I mean, it shows that there's empathy. It shows that there's desire to connect with your own troops.
Well, it shows that you see value in connecting with your troops. I don't think it shows empathy.
You can't really discern whether or not it's intentional or not.
Right.
But I would say that when you have somebody like Caesar or Rommel, that they're eating the food and they're sleeping with their troops and walking with their troops and enduring hardships and not asking anyone to do anything.
Yeah, how do you not have empathy?
Yeah, exactly. So to fake it at that point, I mean, why would you fake it there? That's like the easiest part.
All right. Well, Mr. Cypher Divine, do you care to sign us off with a prophecy? Prophecy.
Before he dies, Boris Guyastov will draw a perfect circle.
Whoa.
Would it be in a Venn diagram?
Yes, it will be part of a Venn diagram.
So only one of the parts of the Venn diagram will be a perfect circle and the other one not perfect?
Correct.
Oh!
Wow.
Hold on. Before we go, one last comment about it. So Boris confided in me yesterday that, when he is old and he may give up his, chase and finding meaning, he will actually start having fun. I like it. So.
When I'm old and decrepit, sure.
Yes.
All right, guys. Well, to be continued, gentlemen.
Absolutely. And I am the Cypher Divine. Goodbye.
In the way of what you're after, nuisance factor, nuisance factor.